Welcome back to yet another episode of Thoughts in History from a Centenarian with Dale Dyer. Well, looks like I kept my promise this time about getting another episode up in the next couple of weeks. Although I have to say it wasn't easy because the footage I recorded got interrupted several times during the filming, and I lost track of how much time we were into the interview, so I ended up with over an hour of footage, although a lot of it was Pop and myself discussing the timeline of events and when they actually happened, because we were discussing the Hampton Motor Tractor Co implement building and the different businesses that have been in the building over the years, some of which I do remember myself. Like I said before, I ended up with over an hour of footage for this episode, much of which I had to edit out because of Pop and mine's ongoing discussion about the timeline of events. But even after cutting it down, I probably still have 40 to 45 minutes of interview footage, which I'm breaking up into several short 15 to 20 minute episodes instead of one long episode. So you'll notice that the ending of the interview footage is abrupt, without a closing to it, as well as the start of the next possible couple of interview footages. So just bear with me during these next few episodes. This episode takes us from the early 60s when Dale and his salesman from the Hampton Motor Tractor Company, Howard Thomas, decided to get out of that business and into the real estate business, how it came about and how they did it. Then we look at what the building has been used for over the years since they shut down the implement business. Enjoy. Welcome back to another episode of Thoughts in History from a Centenarian with Dale Dyer. In this episode, we'll be talking about Dale closing out the implement business and how him and a friend of his got into the real estate business for several years together, how that came about, how many years they were in business together, and then when they branched off and went their separate ways. So with that being said, we will dive right on into this episode.
Okay, back in the early 1960s, we had a sort of an economic turn down. At that time, we had 9 farm equipment businesses in the area between Murphy and Blairsville and Ellijay and Copper Hill. There was 9 dealers, and everybody was beginning to hurt. So my salesman, Howard Thomas, and I decided to look around and see what type of business might be possible. So we made a plan to go down to different towns and ask different businesses what would they think would be a good thing to get into today. And we went down into southwestern Georgia, and then we crossed over into Alabama and stopped at different towns and went way on down and came back up through, and we kind of made a list of all the things that they mentioned, and the most prominent one was real estate. So we come back and we got a hold of a real estate book. Howard and I started studying that book, and after a day's work at the business, we'd go back down to the office and we'd spend a couple of hours going over a chapter in that book. And we did that for a couple of months, and we just almost knew that book from stem to stern, and had a license exam in one of the hotel ballrooms in Atlanta. The hotel is not there anymore, but it was a prominent hotel back at that time. Pretty old, but very well known. And there was around 400 folks that was in there taking this same exam, and it was a 3-hour exam. And the questions were quite pointed and everything. But anyway, it was quite a strain on us, but we kept noticing folks in there that was taking the exam. They'd just get up and walk out. We didn't know what was going on. And when it finished up, there was only about 40 out of that 400 that passed the exam, and Howard and I both passed the exam. And we were congratulated very highly on that. So we were very fortunate that we did pass the exam, and we went to work with Farming Resort up at Hiwassee as agents, and we worked for Mr. Anderson for a year, and we went back and took our broker's exam, and we passed it the next year, and we become brokers in a business on our own. We left the Farming Resort and started the Tri-State Realty Company, and this was in '65, and we operated as Tri-State Realty till '69. and Howard went off on his own to Blairsville in the real estate, and I continued on Dyer Realty in Blue Ridge. All in all, I was in the real estate business about 30 years and sold it once, and the fella took it over didn't know how to run it, and he thought it would run itself, I guess. He got it in kind of financial straits, and so I had to take it back, and I sold it the second time, and it stayed sold that time. So that kind of was the main part of my real estate business.
So backing up to the building, how was it that you ended up with the old Hampton Motor Company building down there? What was it over the years? There was several different businesses that I kind of remember over the years, and what state is it in now?
Okay, I've run that business for those years, and when we went out and went into the real estate business, we'd got the Hampton Hardware. Mr. Hampton had several hardwares, 3 hardwares, and this was a separate sort of a business, but we incorporated the whole thing. So we managers became stockholders of the corporation, and so they decided for me to turn in my stock, and they just signed over the building to me. And my father-in-law says, I think we give you a white elephant.
Even he said that.
Yes, he said that. And he was really worried about how we were going to make a living. Well, after we'd operated for about a year, he come by and sat down with us one day, coming back from Copper Hill, and he was real concerned. What was going to happen to Jenny and the kids. And I said, Mr. Hampton, would you look at our book, what we did in business this last year? And he looked through what we did. I never heard another word out of him about poor Jenny and the kids. So we worked real hard. We worked 7 days a week to get that business going. Anyway, I was left there with that building, and it was empty for a short time. And I got a call from Connecticut, and caller says, is that building available to rent? And I says, well, what did you have in mind? He says, it's available for rent, and we can get together on it. Says, I'd like to put a commercial hatchery in that building. And he says, what kind of a contract can we have on it? I said, if you want to, send me what you would like to do and pay for it. He sent me a contract, and I looked at it when I received it, and it wasn't near what I thought it ought to be. So I had my secretary, Barbara Stilson, who had worked for 12 lawyers, and we had contracts with all of our real estate transactions and so forth, and we got all of them out and went through them and picked out things that would relate to that building and the hatchery. And I sent that contract to him, and he called his lawyers together, and they went over it, and he says, I'm taking Mr. Dyer's contract just as it's written, and never changed a thing on it. So they operated there, and he turned around and spent a considerable amount of money converting that building to a hatchery that required constant temperature and extremely clean. And they operated for several years and did an awful lot of improvement and made a great business out of it. Oh, yes. When they had Pilch there, they even had an elevator they put in.
A freight elevator. I remember that.
Yeah, because when the chicks were hatched and they had to put them into the basement, and they debeaked them and sexed them and checked them for whether there's
diseases and stuff
and so forth.
Right.
And they had Japanese people that would come in and work 24 to 30 hours straight through whenever they'd have a hatching to take place. And these chicks had to be prepared to be shipped out to chick houses, be grown into layers or meat.
Broilers, basically.
Yeah, so it's a busy place, and over a period of years, and it employed a number of people, and the building had been really put in great shape. Finally left and went to Texarkana, next to Texas, and moved their hatchery business out there in the new building. After they left, it was turned into a skating rink, and Pilch had poured a new floor in it with drains and everything so they could wash it down. And then the skating rink come in, they poured another layer of concrete to smooth the whole thing down for roller skating. Then when they left, I rented this building to Van Rod Hosiery Mill, stored some of their equipment they were changing. Then when they cleaned out all that, I rented it to a fellow that was in the wholesale tire business, and he used it as a warehouse for a while. And then finally he moved out. An English lady, evidently they were remodeling a lot of the homes and businesses in England, and all this stained glass and doors and everything. They wanted to get rid of all of that and put in more modern, and she had great displays put in this building and sold a bunch of that stuff for several years while they were doing a lot of building around in this area. Then the fella come along when she got out and bought the building and put a pack of animals that had a fur that made sweaters and all kinds of things. So they manufactured that in the building and changed the inside. They put in a community playhouse. They put on special plays.
But this is after you had sold it altogether entirely, wasn't it? And they had turned it into Hampton Square.
Yeah. So I sold it in 2000.
Wasn't there at one time a furniture place down there in the basement? Because there was a lot of...
Oh, yes. He did a lot of cabinet work and some beautiful work, and he used the basement for his workshop down there for several years. The roof has always been a little bit of a problem. The first roof that was put on that building lasted over 30 years. But after that, our roof was not, they did not take the pains to put the right layers of roofing on it. It was an oval type roof, not a slant type. It was
flat on top, but then it rounded off towards the sides and stuff.
That's right.
But when Pilch was there as a company, they had not only modified the building quite extensively on the inside for their purpose, but they also added a couple of things to it. As I remember, there was a part that was added onto the back side on the lower side where they stored stuff. It was more of
the cleanup area on the rear end of the building.
Right.
And on the side of the building was where they done away with all the waste, dumped it into trucks right from the floor level. They could drive trucks under east side and dump all the eggshells and all the waste of dead chicks and so forth had to be taken out and buried someplace.
But back then they had a lot of VIPs that would come in, and they actually built almost like a little hotel area upstairs too on the front side of the building.
They built two rooms upstairs with bath for when any of the head knockers from Connecticut would come down to check on the place. Yeah. They had a place to stay right there.
Right.
And they also had a sort of a machine repair shop in part of that front section. That was just over top of all the administrative office part of the business. It was quite an operation, and they had their own auxiliary emergency electrical supply because the temperature had to remain the same inside, and if electricity went off, that thing would kick on automatically and maintain the necessary temperatures.
This brings us to the end of this episode, and like I said before, rather abruptly. I apologize for the cutoff ending, but as I stated before, I'm cutting this footage into multiple episodes, thus the reason for the short ending and also for at least the next couple of episodes. And with that, I'll bring this episode to a close. Hope everyone is having a wonderful spring this year with the great weather we're starting to have, the memorable graduations of family and friends, and life just getting back closer to normal from the awful year we had this past year with the global pandemic raging. Hoping and praying that everyone stays safe and healthy out there. And also, if you like what you just seen, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel and click on that bell icon at the upper right corner of your screen to be notified when I upload another episode. Thanks for watching, everyone. God bless, and hope to see you in our next episode.